Alessandro, if you want to start with your talk, you are welcome.
Okay. Hello to everyone, and thank you especially to Professor Pongaro to let me take part in this workshop on Nishitani. I would like to begin this talk by setting its framework, initially by proposing this talk in the context of an ongoing workshop on Nishitani's work, which on this occasion will focus on Nietzsche's Zarathustra and Meister Eckhart. My intention was to focus solely on a specific translation problem from Japanese into my target language, Italian to be precise. However, understanding the international context in which I find myself, where English is the lingua franca and Italian is spoken by only a small number of people, instead of suggesting possible translations of the term in question, I decided to focus on what we might call the imagery that emanates from such a term. It is a peculiar imagery, but the problem of a possible translation will provide the background of this talk. So, the Japanese term I want to discuss is kongen, composed of the kanji kon, root, radical, and gen, source, origin. In the context of the Nishitani essay we are analyzing, such a term has been translated into English as elemental nature. It is a term that is significant in Nishitani's text, recurring throughout and making its fundamental passages. The hypothesis I would like to propose is that the use of the term kongen in the text is not a coincidence, and indeed it determines, at least to some extent, a series of effects that unfold within the text. Specifically, I would argue that in order to understand the effects that the term kongen produces within Nishitani's text, we must refer to a concept coined by Gaston Bachelard, that is material imagination. Let me proceed systematically and try to understand, first, what is meant by material imagination and in what sense the term kongen in Nishitani's work corresponds to such a concept. In fact, Bachelard distinguishes between two kinds of imagination. A formal imagination, which he claims is the imagination usually referred to in aesthetics, psychoanalysis, etc., and a material imagination, the latter, capable of producing images that stem directly from matter, which are indeed named by sight, like an image, but are also known by the hand, and not the eye, by touch. What does all this mean? First of all, it means searching for a principle, or rather a force, that is mostly indifferent, or at least cannot be reduced to formal principle alone. Form is, in fact, an analog of the templum, that is to say, the product of the celestial contemplation of the aruspects, a cutout from the totality of the sky, or the world, of a fragment of movement, which one gives a certain meaning for the future. In fact, to give form means, first of all, to freeze a flow, to limit it, to identify it, to name it, to make it an object. I am reminded of a rather well-known story about Diogenes of Sinope, the cynic. The story goes that when Diogenes heard Plato's definition of human being as a bipedal animal without feathers, he came to the academy with a plucked chicken in his hand and forces Plato's students to change the master's definition. From then on, the shape of humanity will be that of a bipedal animal without feathers, but with flat fingernails. Irony aside, the production of forms is an operation that is certainly necessary for knowledge, but which is often denied its operational character. Actually, what I want to argue is that every form is nothing more than the result of an operation of formation. In this way, my argument is that initially, there is no idea that will be, as Nishitani would say, similar in behavior to a glass that is to be filled with a liquid. On the contrary, the walls of the glass will not exist without the fluid materiality of the liquid to be contained within them. That long introduction having been made, it is now time to discuss more directly the concept of Kongen and its implication for material imagination. What particularly interests me is to understand the effects of this pair of kanji, specifically the second element, the gen. Indeed, Nishitani could have formally referred to the same concept of elemental nature by writing Kongen, as is written in the slide. However, in this second Kongen, the gen differs. In addition to meaning origin, similar to the first gen, it also means meadow or field, unlike the first gen, which rather refers to a spring or to a water source. In this sense, one could say that if Nishitani chose the first way of writing Kongen, it was because he wanted to emphasize the aquatic trait of the elemental nature of the living that he wanted to refer to in his text. However, Nishitani's choice could also have been a simple stylistic choice, or rather, an aesthetic choice in the formal and empty sense. In short, it could have been a choice determined by a form that has nothing to do with the living singularity of matter. My hypothesis is that this is not the case, and that, on the contrary, the material imagination of the aquatic element determines effects on Nishitani's flow of thought, perhaps far beyond his conscious intentions. In particular, this aquatic element seems to evoke two materially oriented images in Nishitani's mind. On the one hand, that of an overflowing river, exceeding its formal boundaries. On the other, a conflict between two reflective surfaces, two eyes, that of the pond and that of the mirror. Although Nishitani's text initially presents the image of the overflowing, I believe we can only grasp its meaning by comparing the reflective images of the water's surface and the mirror. Consider, for example, the well-known myth of Narcissus. Narcissus, a young man of extraordinary beauty, tough desired by others, does not reciprocate desire for anyone. Yet, when he sees his own reflection in the pond's mirror, he falls in love with his own mirror itself, to the point of perishing. What does this story mean for a material imagination? It can be summarized briefly. Let us try to replace the reflecting pond in the Narcissus myth with a glass and metal mirror, similar to those found in our homes. What is the result? In the word of Louis Lavelle, if we imagine Narcissus in front of the mirror, the resistance of glass and metal forms a barrier against his actions. The mirror holds within itself a background that eludes Narcissus, in which he perceives himself without being able to grasp himself, and also recognizes the false distance that separates him from the mirror, a distance that he can reduce but never overcome. Sorry. So, in front of the mirror, our Narcissus can only perceive an unbridgeable distance. Narcissus, facing the glass and metal mirror, can only be true with his reflected image. There is no possibility for Narcissus and his reflection to merge. The mirror is distinct, so the reflection in the mirror is always that of an object, or the contemplation of an object. The surface of the water is different in this respect. It always suggests a possible fusion of Narcissus with his own image. Between Narcissus and his reflection in the pond, there is only the air, or the void, which is essentially the same thing, another medium of potential material imagination, which I will acknowledge but not go into. Narcissus in the pond is not only reflected and mirrored by the water, he can also submerge, his limb merging with those of the image and with the materiality of the water surface. In this potential merging with the water, there is a double possibility that the glass and metal mirrors lack. First, death by drawing. Second, a life that has learned to dispel the reflected image of itself, its ego, by dispersing it through the movement of its hand in contact with the water. Let us then examine how the aquatic imagination, which derives precisely from the above-mentioned Kongensei, elemental nature of living, sheds light on the Eckartian theological concept as described by Nishitani. In fact, Nishitani writes that there are at least two kinds of union. The first, which he calls Kamitu no Goitsu, union with God, and the second, which he calls Shinjitsu ni Junsui Naruichi, one who has become truly pure, translated into English respectively as unity and oneness. The way in which Nishitani approaches the Eckartian deity, God-type, seems quite similar to my previous description of the Narcissus reflection. In fact, there are three moments in the dialectic of the Eckartian one as described by Nishitani. First, there is simple indifference, being as one is, a being in the world that we might call pure animality. Second, there is unity, being with God, mutual recognition, analogous to the image of Narcissus in front of the mirror. Third, we encounter the eminently aquatic image of a self finally liberated from its own image, and a pond finally liberated from our subjective indifference. Immediately after dissolving the image of the ego by dipping the hand into the water of the pond, it is the pond itself that comes alive. Not that it was not alive before. It was just not alive to the ego. It is just that before the mutual immersion, before the contact of the surface of the water with the skin, or perhaps even better, before the correspondence between the aqueous humor of the eye of the self and the eye of the watery mirror, the pond and the self were mutually indifferent. What Nishitani thus reveals via Eckart is a metaphysics constructed by the material imagination through the elemental mediation of water, which alone is capable of such a oneness that cannot be either immediate or purely formal. Take, for example, this passage from Nishitani. Eckart's thought flows through the riverbed of Platonism and into the abyss of Neoplatonism. He says, for example, justice is living, justly living. Justice is being with this way of being itself, and the being of justice, Segi no U, and the being of the just person, Seishikisha no U, are the same one being. In Plato, as is well known, justice itself, sono mono, or the idea of justice, is the original image, genzo, while the justice appearing in the just person is a copy image, mozo. Only in living can the original and the copy become one image. In this passage, and in many others, like in Nishitani's text, the relationship between copy and original, between form and matter, etc., can be understood according to the pattern of Narcissus reflection. The Kongensei, the elemental nature of life, therefore, according to Nishitani, dispels in the dialectical dimension the image-copy relationship of Narcissus in front of the mirror, and, on the contrary, favors the mutual contact of skin and water in touch, as well as the correspondence, again, tactile rather than visual, between the watery eye of the pond and the aqueous humor of Narcissus' eye. Or again, as Eckart says, the eye with which I see God is exactly the same eye with which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one hitotsu, eye, and one hitotsu, seeing. Now, I would like to turn to the second and final point I anticipated earlier, which is the overflow issue. We find this issue addressed in the first part of Nishitani's text, that concerning Nietzsche's Zarathustra. Instead of referring to a mythology, as in the case of Narcissus, this time I would like to rely more on the same aquatic metaphors that Nishitani used to describe the different condition of the saint, Seija, and Zarathustra the transformed, Henshin. As in the previous scenario, it is also a description of Nishitani's dialectic, which means a transition from the undifferentiated to a differentiated unity to oneness. A dialectic, however, that is not a one-way path, a progressive straight line, but a form of repetition, an eternal return of the identical, as Nietzsche would say. How can the awakened one reach the heights, or perhaps it will be better to say the immanent depths of Kongen-sei, the elemental nature of living? In a sense, the solution to the dilemma is already inscribed in the very expression that Nishitani used. As we have said, the term Kongen does in fact contain an aquatic principle. But how is such a principle described in the term Kongen? If we take the gen of Kongen, we can already find it, not only the water radical, Sanzui, but the whole story of Nishitani's dialectic contained in the text we are analyzing. That is a water spring, Izumi, flowing from a cliff or reef, Gandhare. The elemental nature of life for Nishitani is such a wellspring capable of erupting from the depths of the earth. But let us go one step further. For Nishitani, the life of the saint, Seija, is still a life of the two. That is, it is a life in which the saint himself and God are still distant from each other. In Nishitani's word, the saint was able to unite with the life of God in the great natural world by dying to his life in the human world. Seen from this rebirth, Saisei, living in the human world probably looks like a dying. Nevertheless, no matter how lofty Takakisei, a life his rebirth, Saisei, might attain, it will still be one that places its wellspring before itself. It is a living that places God before itself, and thereby remains true with God. The life of the saint is therefore a life that places its wellspring before itself, or in front of itself. Of course, in Nishitani's word, we could say that the life of the saint is not the life of one who immerses himself in the wellspring, of one who, together with it, prolongs his own aquatic origin. But it is in the continuation of this aquatic image, which, as I argued before, with Bachelard derives from the very materiality of water, that Nishitani comes to describe the condition of the transformed Henshin. If the saint is merely the one who sees his own reflection in the water of the pond, the transformed is the one who becomes one with the same water, prolonging the overflowing movement of the wellspring. In fact, there is no longer any difference between the wellspring and the transformed. The transformation is the same overflowing movement of the wellspring. Let me quote Nishitani again. Bless the cup that wants to flow over, such that water flows golden from it, and everywhere carries the reflection of your bliss. This transfiguration is a transfiguration towards overflowing will, a furedentus uruishi, instead of the self being filled by great life. As with the saint, great life fills the self. When the self is filled, the shape of the self still remains. The self is still an eidos, keiso. Here, the water of life merely fills the space of the cup, but when great life fills the self, the water of life breaks through the shape of the cup and overflows. And any eidos that remains, even in the self were to become empty, is rejected from within. End of the quotation. Such an overflowing, a furero, a furero, as described by Nishitani, less to the overflowing life, mici a furero sei mei, of Zarathustra. A life that overflows, a furero, precisely because of its watery fullness, michiru. A watery fullness, that of the transformed, which, as we can see, not only opposes eidos or forms, but transcends them, setting them in motion through a reconnection with the elemental nature of life. In this respect, it is precisely the materiality of water in the elemental nature of life, that makes such a transformation possible. A transformation that has nothing to do with the life of the saint, with the simple transcendence of a god, and the word behind the word, as Nietzsche would say. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Alessandro. Perfectly timed. So let's open to question and comment.
Sharing this screen so I can see you better.
Oh yes, it's better.
Sorry.
Also some persons on Zoom. Also the participant on Zoom, if you want to put questions or comments. Jim?
This is not a question, just a remark.
Okay.
I'm the one responsible for translating Kongen in Nishitani as elemental.
Okay.
When Von Brack did the translation and then I went through it, I changed it because there were just too many words for foundational, original, and so forth. And I struggled with the word because, and you probably can come up with something better, we could change it. But I mean, Kong is the image of a double meaning of origin and also the root. So it's matter. And Gen is the original form of the character for Hara, which, as you explained, has an izumi underneath it. So it's a plain and water. And so I had to choose between two of them. You couldn't use fountainhead, that wouldn't be enough, and that doesn't make an adjective anyway. So I looked all over the place, and then finally I remembered Reinhold's theories in the 1800s. One of these people who popularized Kant and referred to the unity of consciousness as elemental consciousness. And now, after the translation of Nishitani, around the year 2000, elemental philosophy came to mean something completely different. It means the philosophy of the four elements. So probably the meaning of elemental falls between the cracks. It doesn't mean exactly what Reinhold meant, and it doesn't mean exactly what it means today. But that was the reason I chose it. And also because of Bachelard's comment, he talks about the elements, the four elements, as the hormones of the imagination. You quoted them. So the concept of element seems the best way, but maybe today I would do it differently, but that was my idea at the time. Yeah. And then since then, everybody started doing it. So it's out of my hands now.
If I can say something to Jim,
Yes.
I totally agree with the thing that you said just now. I don't have, of course, a better translation. I think that elemental could be a good one, and I see this duality of the Kongen that you emphasize right now. And in Italian too, I can't find a better translation for this concept. I don't know how to translate it, so I have this talk for this reason, because I don't know how to translate it properly. So I just want to understand how.
Yes, we can discuss about this thought of him. But I want to ask to Jim. Jim, could Kongen simply be the Japanese translation of the German term Ursprung? Because, for example, also Heidegger is translating in Japanese exactly with Kongen, the Ursprung des Kunstwerkes. Or is corn springen, and the
Yeah.
water that comes out.
Yeah, that's true, but it seems to me that there was a different word used for Ursprung.
Component.
But also Comte,
So there is.
he has Comte also,
Hmm.
and Compon and Comgen. So, yeah, in German, Ursprung is perfect, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, Ursprünglich, but we don't get that in English.
Yes, it also. It's a very interesting problem of
Yeah.
translation.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's what that's what I wanted to say. That like, my impression is like Nishitani is taking Compton as a
Okay. Finish. No, it's your turn. All right.
No, I wanted to like because I so like the first impression is yes, maybe he's taking Compton like he's taking Kongentekki as like ursprünglich, but then of course this watery metaphor like comes up in a way that is very important. It was important for Heidegger, who has this idea of like an upgrund rather than just ground, which is like the metaphor, let's say the elemental imagination of the basis of the origin of the arche, very earthen in Western philosophy. So like when we are working on like let's say this post-romantic, like Nietzsche included, I don't know how much Eckart could be part of that, but it's also I don't know him enough, but like so that we have a shift from earthen metaphors to like water and especially arid ones. So like Alessandro was like arguing extremely well, but the other Nishitani say, but like this Konpontekki is like Kongentekki is really important, is the elemental imagination of Kutosoku, which is instead completely a la Bachelard, interested in the nexus of like air, transparency, winds, and so on, mists, and imagination. Like I think that like reading Nishitani with Bachelard is extremely important because also reveals some like hidden metaphors in most Western, mostly German authors. But and my suggestion to Alessandro, actually one German author that could like there was an influence on Heidegger, there's an influence on Nietzsche, but like the first big thinker of water in a European context is probably Goethe. So, which also has this idea of ursprünglich that like is very much about a stream. So kind of like that has these coincidence of like energia, but also like being able to take a form, a certain stability, being able to like be swum into. So that's another, which probably was another thinker that was like felt as very, very connected to Japanese tradition by a couple of generations of Japanese thinkers. So like that's another really sort of. I don't know how much, that's my question. I don't know how much this could be found in Nietzsche. Apart from the metaphor of overflowing, he's not really a thinker of this, this equilibrium that's giving us water. Like where would the origin would be in Nietzsche? Because he's like dealing with a very different, let's say, material imagination. It's not a prevailing element in his work.
Two questions for you. The first one, Lorenzo, is to repeat the name of the author that you mentioned before. I didn't heard it.
The first German talking about
the German
empathic element.
I can't hear.
Goethe.
Goethe. Okay. So, sorry. I really can't hear. Okay.
No, it's
sorry. Yeah. Okay. And the second thing is that I don't know what is the Nietzschean idea of origin. I'm not a Nietzsche specialist, so it's a question that I have to analyze in some way.
But
So I can't really answer to your question.
Don't worry, Alessandro, because I have my list there. So Nietzsche specialist probably can give us some advices. Professor Kim.
Okay. Thank you so much for your very, very interesting lecture. Today morning, I have said something about this lyrical expression in Nishitani's writing. So I just want to ask you two questions. maybe I misunderstood you. So if that is, please correct me. The first one is the T.S. Eliot, he explained the problem of Hamlet by the concept of the objective correlate. That is the interesting objective correlate. For example, clouds or the skies or the trees, we can express our feelings. For example, the skies, the blue, that is also some expression. Our feeling is there. So what is is there any difference between this material imagination? I don't know really about this bachelor, but material imagination and this objective correlate. So if you can give some hints, then it would help me very much. That is my first question. The second question is, you mentioned about this, the Eckart mentioning about this, the I see God, with which I see God is the I with which God sees me. And that metaphor, that expression, and related that with the mirror water, this narcissist, the usages. As long as I understand this, the I, with which Eckart expressed this, the union with God is it's very difficult for me to understand, but at least the mirror or water, that is to objectify myself. We use mirror to objectify myself. So in that sense, it already, how can I say, want to doubling of myself. But I think it is not the same with the what Eckart said, using the metaphor I. So if you can give me some advice to my understanding, or if I misunderstood, then please correct me. So that's my two questions.
Okay. Regarding the first question, I don't know exactly what Eliot's mean with objective correlation or something like that. I'm not an Eliot specialist again, but if I can add something on the material imagination of Bachelard, the idea is that the material for the imagination, as water in this case, are not just poetic grasp for the imagination, but determines in some way the content of the imagination, or the form of the imagination, the shape of the imagination, or something like that. I can't imagine, I don't know, image of water without considering the matter of water, something like that. I don't know if it's similar to the objective correlation in Eliot or something like that. I really don't know. You can tell me if you want. And for the second question, I don't understand precisely the question, but if I understood something, the problem of this narcissistic description that I made is not that when you are in front of the pond or something like that, and you see your reflection in the pond, you objectify your reflection. At the contrary, in the Narcissus pond description, I said the contrary. When you are in front of the pond, you can swim in the pond, for instance. You can touch the water of the pond. You can feel the materiality of the pond with your own materiality, or something like that. So you are connected profoundly with the pond. At the contrary, when you are in front of the mirror and you see your reflection on the mirror, on a glass and metal mirror, you can only see the distance between you and your reflection. At that point, you can objectify the reflection in the mirror, your own reflection in the mirror. So there are two different occasions of reflection. I don't know if it's more clear or the contrary. I don't know.
For example, also Nishida uses several times the verb sink into, sink down, botsu, botsu, enter. So this is something that you can make with water. You can touch water and your hands go into the water. But if you touch a mirror, you feel a resistance, and the effect, the mirroring effect or illusion is finished. So probably there is some, but Alessandro, there is in ENOJP an Italian translation of the first part of Zen Tachiba, where Nishitani uses the example of the mirror in a very effective way, translated by Anna Ruggeri Takeshita, I think. So if you have not yet the opportunity to read it, we can.
No, I didn't read it. So
you read it. This also.
No. I didn't read it. So I take note.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tobias is okay.
Yes. Less of a question and more maybe of a comment that continues this discussion now on the mirror and the reflection and the narcissism. The text itself by Nishitani, he does, even though you emphasize this kind of immersive quality of the water image, material image, that it is possible other than glass or metal for, let's call it the subject, the ego, to immerse itself into the medium of the mirror that is the water surface. But at the same time, Nishitani introduces in the text that is the reference for our workshop now, introduces this mirror function precisely with the water surface when he speaks about how Aboriginal people first, when they looked at the water and had this first self-reflection, and then in a certain sense discovered their nakedness and what is the image that he uses, colored their faces. So they gained a reflexive sense of self by looking at the water surface as a mirror. And so he doesn't, of course, the way you introduce the image, it makes sense, but he uses it precisely as this kind of more glazen or narcissistic surface, which does not allow for this immersion in the first instance. Although I would agree with this trajectory that this whole strategy of his text leads to this point, that it is about, in a certain sense, the task of the subject to immerse itself into the mirror. But then I would, and this is something that Nishitani does not touch upon on this text, but something that is my own interest in reading Nishitani, and something that I find curiously missing in this discussion of the mirror, precisely insofar as something like the water surface or the narcissistic imagery comes up in this context, in that the Western tradition, if one wants to call it the Western tradition, but what Nishitani also discusses in relation to Nietzsche and this whole opposition between the saint and Zarathustra is the latent confrontation of Christianity. Because I see that we do have in the Western tradition, again in parentheses, we do have precisely this image of immersion into water in the baptismal image, precisely in the relation to God. The baptized subject is immersed into the image of Christ and is baptized into his death, is baptized into the death of God, precisely by being immersed into the baptismal water and then re-emerging as being reborn and restored in the image of Christ. And so there is this precisely this image that he seems to point at or try to get at in the strategy of his text of, in a certain sense, getting rid of this merely narcissistic self-reflection on the water surface and precisely merging or immersing oneself with the mirror itself and then re-emerging with a new restored image, as a new restored image, in a profound unity, not just with God as mirror, but also with the themes that he touches upon later in the text, God also as being in a certain sense infused with this negativity of the watery depth, with death itself. What I see is that there is something like an undercurrent, no pun intended, in Nishitani's text, where this baptismal imagery and this confrontation of Christianity seems to be at play, but without being properly articulated, maybe because he is himself too infatuated with this Nietzschean polemic against the Christian theology, and this opposition between Zarathustra and the saint, where I see in Nietzsche's depiction of the saint actually more of a caricature of the proper Christian theology. If one properly recognizes the original Christian theological themes, I think they would correspond much more with what you just described in your discussion of narcissism and the overcoming of narcissism in the material imagery that Nishitani uses. So sorry, it's not a question, but more kind of a commentary.
It's really interesting, and I just want to add something about this narcissistic imagery. That is, of course, I didn't use the image of Narcissus as it used in the Western tradition or something like that. I just want to, in some way, rewrite the myth of Narcissus. Because of course in the myth of Narcissus there is a tragic end, and in a sense I want to write a comic end to the story or something like that. That is just an end that didn't finish with the death of Narcissus, but with I don't know, with us swimming in the pool or something like that. I don't know if it's clear or not, but
yeah, well, but I would in this direction I would point my comment if I'm allowed to put it more maybe succinctly. I would say that it is not necessary to transform the narcissistic imagery or the tragedy of Narcissus, insofar as I would say that already the Christian material imagery, so Christ is already the answer to the narcissistic tragedy. Precisely insofar as this whole relation between mirror image and the immersion into the mirror surface is, in a certain sense, resolved in this whole baptismal relation to Christ and the Christian God. Whereas in the narcissistic imagery, there is precisely the tragedy because Narcissus cannot enter the surface. He starts at the shore in front of his desired image because he cannot make that move of being baptized in the depth of these waters and re-emerge as reborn or restored. But Christ seems to me precisely the answer to this narcissistic tragedy. So I don't think it's necessary to invent a parody or new form of narcissism. Yeah.
Maybe there could be also another possible end that is the Spinozistic one. So just to jump into the water and swim together with the ocean. But okay, so thank you very much, Alessandro.
Thank you.